Smash Ultimate served as a huge thank you, bringing back every single fighter we had ever seen alongside a ton of new additions. 89 total fighters. And honestly, most people would agree that it's the best Smash game we've ever gotten in terms of content, replayability, and sheer scale. But Ultimate only works because it's Ultimate. This game is pushing 8 years old, the Switch 2 is here, and with backwards compatibility, simply making Ultimate again but bigger feels pointless. At that point, we may as well just keep getting DLC. Smash 6 needs its own identity. And while I love having so many characters at our disposal, the roster has reached a point where it feels bloated, making Smash 6 the perfect opportunity to trim things down and rethink the future of the series. So today, I'm rebuilding the Smash roster from the ground up and cutting it down to make room for new fighters. My goal here is to narrow this down to a total of 50 roster spots before I even think of adding any more. I want to place the characters that will no longer have their own spot on the roster into 3 different categories that explain my reasoning. And just because a character doesn't make this roster doesn't mean they can never return in the future. The goal here is to build a more focused base roster that also leaves room for brand new fighters to help this game establish its own identity, but we'll get into those newcomers a little later. Now before we get into this category, I want to clarify that these fighters are not actually being removed from the game. Instead, they'll be sharing a character slot with their main counterparts, similar to how Echo fighters can already be grouped together in Smash Ultimate. Dark Samus, Daisy, Lucina, Chrom, and Ken. These Echo fighters are all returning but will no longer have their own actual character tile on the roster. They're different enough to stay in the game, but I just think to make as much room as possible and to put emphasis on the rebuilding of the roster, they will share tiles with their main counterparts. But now it's time for the harder decisions. Let's talk about the characters we're actually cutting from the roster. Now to start, these will be characters that are from franchises that are simply overrepresented in the series. One of the biggest issues that could be had with the roster is that certain franchises simply take up way too much space. And I'm not really one to complain too often about that, considering most of these fighters can be somewhat justified. I just think that this new game should focus a lot more on quality representation rather than sheer quantity. Not every franchise needs 7 or 8 playable fighters to feel represented. I mean, I'm sorry, but Fire Emblem alone taking up nearly a tenth of the roster despite being one of Nintendo's more middle ground franchises in terms of like popularity is kinda crazy. Maybe I'm being harsh. I'm sorry to all of the 13 Fire Emblem fans. Dr. Mario, Pichu, Young Link, Piranha Plant, Lucario, Robin, Corrin, Incineroar, and Byleth. I'm sorry to you guys, but yeah, you gotta go. Dr. Mario and Piranha Plant are both cases of characters that kinda don't justify roster slots, but Mario's already very represented in the series. Dr. Mario is essentially Mario with a jacket and slightly altered moveset, so trust me on this removal, it'll make a lot more sense later. And Piranha Plant is a fun novelty, but no, scratch that. He sucks. I never liked his addition. I never will. You can be an item or something, dude. With Young Link, this isn't really an overrepresented franchise more than it's just an overrepresented character. I mean, we have 3 Links who are all very similar. Original Link obviously has to stay. And I'm gonna keep Toon Link over Young because at least visually he is way more unique. I just don't think we ever need the same character damn near taking up 3 roster slots. Pokemon is also very heavily represented, so I decided to cut Pichu, Lucario, and Incineroar. These can also kind of fit in the no longer justified section, but since Pokemon as a franchise is so heavily pushed, I figured I'd put them here. I don't mind replacing them with a newer or even more deserved Pokemon, but I think Lucario has kind of overwelcomed his stay. Incineroar was cool but not necessarily a top option for a new installment, and we already have Pikachu cemented in the roster, so unfortunately Pichu's gonna have to go. Robin, Corrin, and Byleth is just cutting off some of the excess amount of Fire Emblem characters. They're cool, no disrespect, they're actually some of the more unique characters, but that's why I even paired up the Fire Emblem Echoes together, since I think they just took up far too much roster space. So now that leaves us with 72 roster spots. Let's get to 50. Now this next category will consist of characters that I just straight up don't think have a justified spot on the new roster. I'm not implying they're bad additions or from irrelevant games, but every slot really has to earn its place. Whether it's a lack of long-term impact, declining relevance, awkward fit, or simply being outclassed by better options, here's who I ultimately decided to leave behind. Ultimately. Get it? Ice Climbers, Game & Watch, Sheik, Rob, Lucas, Zero Suit Samus, Pit, Dark Pit, Palutena, Wii Fit Trainer, Villager, Rosalina, Simon, Richter, Terry, Min Min, Pyra and Mithra, and all 3 Mii fighters. Alright, let's run down this list quickly. Ice Climbers, Game & Watch, Rob, Simon, Richter, and the Kid Icarus characters all mostly fall into the same little category. They represent that retro Nintendo era, which I absolutely respect, but in a tighter and more modern Smash roster, I just can't justify all of them sticking around at once. I'm not completely removing that era from Smash though. Characters like Little Mac, Duck Hunt, and Pac-Man still stay because I think they're simply the stronger and more iconic picks overall. And I mean, Simon and Richter have like Hellspawn movesets, so I'm not exactly heartbroken letting them go. With Cutting Sheik, we literally just haven't seen her in a game in a minute, but I actually don't mind her still existing through Zelda's moveset similar to the transformation mechanic from older Smash games, just not as her own separate roster slot. So technically Sheik could still stay. And for Lucas, obviously I gotta keep OG Ness. The 64 characters are all insta-locks basically, and he is like the foundational Earthbound representative. For a series that doesn't get much shine anymore, one fighter is more than enough for the time being. That's kind of the same feeling I carry with Villager, where we only need one representative from the series, and Isabelle is an actual recognizable Animal Crossing mascot, as to where Villager is not like an actual character for real. Terry, okay, his moveset's genuinely unique and stuff. I am curious as to how many people were actually familiar with the game Fatal Fury before his addition. Maybe I'm being ignorant, but I don't think Fatal Fury has the kind of recognition that justifies a permanent roster spot moving forward. For Min Min, I really think we should have gone Springman instead, but even then, ARMS does feel like a one-off game that we will probably never get a sequel for, so I also can't really justify having her back. Wii Fit Trainer, well, the last Wii was 13 years ago, which is also part of the reason why the Mii fighters can go too. I know the Mii fighters could seem ridiculous to let go, but Smash I feel already has so much gameplay variety that customizable blank slate characters, and I say characters with an asterisk, they just don't feel necessary anymore. Plus, I'd much rather actual crossover characters become fully realized fighters instead of Mii costumes. As for Rosalina, she's kind of one of the in-between characters because I think Mario is already super represented, but she hasn't been very prominent in a while. I mean, she had 5 minutes of screen time in the Mario Galaxy movie, which is ridiculous, by the way. But yeah, I recognize she still makes her share of appearances in other games. I just think Mario already dominates the roster, and when trimming things down, I think the core Mario cast simply just takes priority first. Pyra and Mithra are definitely one of the more controversial cuts here, because Xenoblade has definitely become a huge Nintendo franchise over the last decade. Their inclusion in Ultimate just feels kinda tied to that specific era. Xenoblade 3 is out now, and Shulk is more like the long-term foundational representative for the franchise. But like I said, just please wait a little longer. When I add characters, it makes more sense. So if we tally it up, that leaves us with 52. But I want to get to 50 before I add more. Okay, these next 2 I'm removing, I'll admit, are hate and perhaps ignorance. Steve can go, Hero can go. These are 2 characters I despise, in a way. If you stay long enough, I'm gonna have a better Microsoft representative added, wink wink. Steve is probably the hardest cut on this entire list because Minecraft is undeniably one of the most influential games ever made. But when rebuilding Smash into a more focused roster, I think there's a difference between a character being historically important and a character feeling essential to Smash's long-term identity. Steve's inclusion in Ultimate felt like the peak of the Everyone is Here era, an era where Smash became gaming history's biggest crossover event. And while that worked perfectly for Ultimate, I'm not sure every massive gaming icon needs to become a permanent staple moving forward. Hero is another character I respect way more than I personally care about. Dragon Quest is massively important to gaming history, especially in Japan, so I completely understand why he made it into Ultimate. But similar to Terry, Hero feels more like a Celebration era edition rather than a fighter I view as essential to Smash moving forward in a more condensed roster. And since I'm not from Japan, maybe I'm not fully grasping how stupid it may look to remove him, but hey, it's my list. Alright, that leaves the 50 fighters you now see on screen. Ultimate obviously did a great job representing new franchises and giving us crossover moments we could only dream of years ago, but now it's time to build something new. Now I'm going to start quick with the Nintendo specific editions because after this I'm really going to be going crazy with my picks. I think for starters, we can get Paper Mario. I said it 6 years ago and I'll say it again. Paper Mario has a really good moveset potential, and I think this is a lot better than something like Dr. Mario. The same way Toon Link is on the roster, I think if someone is gonna have a second version of their character, it should have a completely different look, and Paper Mario reaches that criteria. Now, I removed a handful of Pokemon, but it being overrepresented is only half true since it is Nintendo's biggest overall franchise. So even after making cuts, I still wanted to add 2 new representatives, one modern pick and one legacy fan favorite. For the newer generation, I would go with either or Armarouge or Ceruledge, and for the legacy pick, Empoleon. I actually haven't dabbled in a Pokemon game since probably Gen 6, so my knowledge on the newer guys is very surface level, but my friend really stressed to me that those were like the 2 best options for Gen 9, and Empoleon is just peak, Gen 4 is peak, and bro, he's a penguin. Like what? My last addition for Nintendo specific characters would have to be Mio from Xenoblade. It would be hard to disregard how big Xenoblade has gotten over the years, so I figured if I do remove Pyra and Mythra, it would at least be fair to add a newer character from the series. Between Mio and Noah, and while I do like the name Noah, I don't really care to get crazy amounts of sword fighters again, so Mio would be my personal option. And the rest are no longer Nintendo. Master Chief, Halo. If you know anything about me, that's my GOAT right there, bro. Master Chief needs to be in Smash, and Smash 6 is the perfect game to finally get him in there. Halo is so important to gaming, but even beyond that, he would fit. Dude's a half-ton super soldier who can function as a heavy, a gunner, and a brawler all at once. The moveset potential here is ridiculous. Could he end up being the most miserable character to fight in the entire game? Yeah, maybe. I don't care. Master Chief for Smash. The next 2 picks are characters that I've gotten snubbed for a while now, and that's both Crash and Spyro. They're gaming icons, they've been requested for years, and both franchises played a massive role in defining platformers for entire generations. Smash has already crossed so many impossible lines that leaving these 2 behind at this point just feels kinda wrong. Crash feels like he would naturally fit with all the spin attacks, crates, masks, and movement options from the original games. And Spyro practically built his own Smash moveset for you between the charging, gliding, fire breath, and elemental powers. Now I'm going to move on to fighting games. I definitely want to throw in Chun-Li since this is another one of those characters I've been hoping to get for years as well. She's one of the most iconic Street Fighter characters, and unlike a lot of potential additions, her moveset practically designs itself. Between the kicks, movement, and speed-focused gameplay, she'd feel very, very different from Ryu and Ken, while also adding some much-needed female representation to the fighting game lineup. And at this point, if Smash already has Street Fighter and Tekken representation, there's no excuse for Mortal Kombat to still be missing, so I'm adding 2 fighters here, Scorpion and Shao Kahn. Scorpion is just up there on the Mount Rushmore of fighters, and it would be a dream come true for so many people to see Mortal Kombat characters join this roster. And adding fighters from other games is just so easy. There doesn't really need to be much effort in designing their moveset. And I also want to add Shao Kahn since he's a villain, and we are lacking in the villain and heavy department, so he's my second option. With the sheer brutality of his character, he'd bring in a completely different energy to the roster, and variety is exactly what we're aiming for. And for my final pick, which is definitely the most far-fetched, Nemesis from Resident Evil. Just hear me out. I'm obviously a big fan of the series, but Resident Evil is one of the biggest and most influential franchises in gaming history, yet Smash still has basically 0 horror representation whatsoever. And honestly, if Smash managed to make Minecraft work, I don't really think this is that insane anymore. Smash has already dabbled in darker and horror adjacent aesthetics through characters like Simon and Bayonetta, so the tone really isn't the issue, plus Nemesis once again would fill a role the roster honestly lacks right now, a horror villain heavyweight. The rocket launcher, the mutations, the aggression, the moveset potential would actually go crazy. And yeah, that's my Smash 6 roster. Ultimate is peak. Even if I'm switching up the roster, that's not me saying what we currently have is bad. But Smash 6 should not have the exact same goals as Ultimate. What I think we need now is something a little more condensed, a more focused lineup that still keeps the core identity of Smash intact while making room for fighters that have been long overdue to receive their invitations. Obviously, some of these takes are probably crazy to some, especially after some of the cuts I made, but hey, that's part of the fun with a roster discussion like this. But I genuinely want to know what everyone else thinks, whether you agreed or not, who should stay, who should go, and who should finally be added into Smash. The options are damn near limitless, and it's only a matter of time. Something's gotta be on the way. Right?